Today's webinar, which is part of the Stand Up for Your Rights series. And tonight we're going to be talking about the disability standards for education. And we've got a fantastic panel members that will be joining us to do that. My name's Chris Edwards. I'm the manager of our Government Relations and Advocacy team. And I really welcome you and thank you very much for attending today. I want to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in the many lands that we meet today and pay my respect to those elders past and present. I'd also like to inform you that we will be recording the webinar tonight, and both for being able to replay it for people that haven't been able to join us, but also to use it to reflect on some of the comments and the feedback to inform our submission that we'll be talking about later on. So the purpose today is for us all to learn a little bit more about the disability standards around education and how they relate to the Disability Discrimination Act, how they relate particularly to those students that are blind or low vision. We will hear from the various panel members on what that means for them and how the standards relate to them. And really excitingly, for the first time in this series, we're going to provide the opportunity and open up the mics so that that you can all join us in providing the feedback. That we'll really hear about those experiences and challenges and positive things that are happening out there that may inform our submission around the disability service, the standards for education. So I'd like to firstly just welcome the panel members. So we have the first member is Dr. Ben Gauntlett. Ben is the Human Rights Commissioner for Disability in Australia. We have Lesleigh Butler, who is one of our great advocacy volunteers, but also a mother of a child who's got a vision impairment. And Melissa Fanshawe, who is a specialist in education, but has also got a child with who's blind. So welcome, panel. And I'll start by asking you to introduce yourself. So welcome, Ben.
Thank you very much for having me, Chris. And I too acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which we all meet. I sit upon Gadigal land of the Eora Nation. I acknowledge all elders in the audience today, past, present and emerging, and also pay my respects to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are watching or listening today. Education is a wonderful way for people to build a better life. But far more importantly, it also creates values relating to inclusivity and how we view fellow people throughout our life. It's not just about the books we read, the lessons we're taught, or the lessons that we sit through, but it's also the total experience that we have during some very formative years of our life. The disability standards for education are being reviewed this year. There's a review being undertaken by the Commonwealth Department of Education. But at their outset, what they try and do is they try and make sure that each and every person can have an equal opportunity for education. We know from previous reviews of the standards that that's not always the case. However, hopefully they can be improved, and events like tonight enables us to have discussions about how we improve the education standards, and also how we look at the policy framework, part of which is the National Disability Strategy, which is being reviewed this year, about how to ensure that we have not just reasonable opportunities for people, but great educational opportunities for all Australians. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. A great way to put it in context. And so over to you, Leslie.
Hi, thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. I'm Leslie. Really pleased to be here tonight to add to this really important conversation. A little bit about me. I'm a mother of 2 children. Jacob, my youngest child, who's currently in Year 2, has a vision condition called aniridia, which is a congenital condition that affects both his near and distance vision. So he's assessed as legally blind. Jacob's a really lovely, happy little boy with about as much cheek as most 8-year-old boys have. At the moment, he's obsessed with Minecraft, like all 8-year-olds. And his first world problem is trying to convince his father to let him have his own YouTube channel so that others can watch him play Minecraft. But like many of you, probably as parents, before Jacob was born, I didn't have any experience in supporting a person with low vision. And over the last several years, I've navigated my way through Better Start, through the NDIS, through early intervention supports, and most recently, and the topic of tonight, the education system. So my main background is in law, but I took a break from practicing law before Jacob started primary school. When I was a lawyer, I spent most of my time in litigation, but also a little bit of time in policy and interpreting different and advising on different laws. So for the last couple of years, I've been volunteering with the Advocacy group at Vision Australia. It's allowed me to use a few of my legal skills, but also to engage with some of the issues that are facing the blind and low vision community at the moment. And basically that's what's led me here tonight.
And very much welcome. Thank you, Leslie.
Thanks.
And our last panel member, Melissa.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I've worked in education for over 20 years in different roles as a classroom teacher, an advisory teacher, a deputy and a principal. In fact, I worked with students with vision impairment from 2000, where I taught a student in a classroom and then worked as an advisory teacher in adaptive technology. So I was preparing Braille and making adjustments for students in the region who were blind. Then, excuse me, in 2007, I had my 3rd child, who was born with a condition called Peters anomaly, which meant he had clouding over his eyes and an associated glaucoma. This ruptured at 9 days and was eventually removed after a failed corneal implant. But he's now 13. He plays cricket, goalball, and he's top of his class in maths. His other eye, excuse me, has very limited sight, so he can count fingers. He reads Braille, uses a cane, and is obsessed with all things technology, like most 13-year-olds. So I then went on to get my master's in vision impairment and moved to work at the University of Southern Queensland as an education lecturer. So I'm studying my doctorate working with Vision Australia to create a senior school curriculum for students who are blind and have low vision. So I'm the parent representative for the client reference group for Vision Australia, which gives the client's voice to the board for VA. I also work with my research partner, Dr. Melissa Kane, to hear the students and parents' voice of children with vision impairment in mainstream education, and that's from early years to tertiary.
Thanks, Melissa. And I think everyone would agree that we've got a terrific amount of experience on the panel tonight. Ben, I was wondering about if you could sort of talk a little bit more about your role and how that and how the DSE relates, expanding on what you said initially. is.
Sorry, Ben, I'm just not sure if we can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yep,
We can.
got you.
Oh, I said something very golden there, Chris, but
Yeah, so we wanted to hear a little bit more about
I
your
work
role.
as
Yeah.
Disability Discrimination Commissioner at the Australian Human Rights Commission.
Whoop, dropped out again.
More gold was being said.
Can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay. I work as Disability Discrimination Commissioner at the Australian Human Rights Commission, and in that role, it's principally a policy role, but one of the things you do get to look at is the complaints data relating to disability discrimination actions. They come through the complaints arm of the Australian Human Rights Commission, and a consistent area of complaint is education. When I say education, I mean that quite broadly. That includes education and training. So vocational training also comes within that sphere. 19.9% of Australians live with disability. But in terms of the rate of disability relative to people's age, 4% of people between 0 and 4 have a disability, 10% between 5 and 19, and 13% between 15 and 64. And so, whilst the figures indicate that the amount of people living with disability at a young age are lower, in some ways that makes it even more important to have fit-for-purpose laws that ensure people with disability are appropriately looked after in the education system. The disability standards for education are designed to clarify the Disability Discrimination Act. The way how they work is that if you comply with the disability standards for education, you are not in breach of the Disability Discrimination Act. So in a sense, they're a defence to a claim. Other standards that have been made under the Disability Discrimination Act deal with public transport and they deal with buildings. Although the standards are meant to make it easier to understand the rights and obligations under the Disability Discrimination Act, they also cover areas in a lot more depth to ensure that people understand the processes that must be undertaken relating to certain issues. And the standards cover enrolment, participation in education, curriculum development, accreditation and delivery, student support services, and the elimination of harassment and victimisation. What is known, though, about the standards is one of the most challenging issues is the obligation to make reasonable adjustment. And there is within that a need to consult with students and their family members or carers about what is a reasonable adjustment. And in terms of what my role is in relation to the disability standards is we're a major stakeholder to ensure that those standards are fit for purpose, useful, and ensure that people's human rights are respected. And for that to occur, we need many things to take place, but one of them is probably to get better data as to what is occurring across Australia relating to education. Another is for it to be more transparent as to when there is a complaint and what's being done. And the final one is to present practices such as gatekeeping to ensure that everyone has to the fullest extent possible, has the same access to education as others. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Ben. I think that, clearly, they're important because we've recently done a survey that said, and the respondents 1 in 3 said that their child didn't receive any assistive technology and assistive technology training to support them in the school where they thought they needed it. And so, that's a form of reasonable adjustment. Lesleigh, you've recently with a child in grade 2 have gone through a process of, you know, finding a school, getting your child into school. What was that experience like for you?
Look, the experience as a whole has been positive, but it's also been a lot of work. Before Jacob started school, I guess in terms of the standards, I had a general awareness that they were there and that he was entitled to adjustments to learn and participate at school. My knowledge of the standards, I think, has become a lot better since then. But I don't think the standards were probably at the forefront of my mind when it came to enrolling Jacob at school. And I actually don't recall them ever having been mentioned at any point during his schooling, although they have definitely been applied. So in terms of Jacob, our choice of school was our local Catholic school where our older daughter also attends. And that school wasn't supporting any children with low vision at the time, but we knew the school and we knew that they generally supported diverse learning. And after some good initial interactions with the school and with Sydney Catholic schools, we had confidence that Jacob was going to be able to get supports. So as I said, his experience has been positive, and as a parent, my experience has also been positive. And I think that's because I've actually been welcomed in to work together with the staff in what they describe as a wraparound approach to ensure Jacob's needs are being met. So we've been fortunate to have the support of very professional caring staff, but they also acknowledge the time and effort that we've put in as a family to the process. And I think that the tone was probably set by the principal right at the start when he said to us that the school would probably learn more from Jacob than he could ever learn from them. So we were off to a good start with that. But I think probably the highlight for me in all of it has been that the things have been put in place for Jacob, which haven't only allowed him to learn, but which have normalised his learning and allowed him to develop friendships and social connections. My favourite example is that in trying to encourage Jacob to learn Braille, he was asked to write some stories in Braille, which he did, and he developed a character called Mr. Onion. And what the school did was they then took those stories and they made them into books and put them in the library, school library, so that students could borrow them. And they're always in hot demand, and it's given him a little bit of a pop star status at school. But I think the school went further. They had the children in his grade participate in Braille days, and there was also visits from people for the children to learn more about what it meant to be someone who was living with blindness or low vision. So on the whole, we've had a positive experience, but I think that that's because the effort has been there from everyone involved, including us.
I love that quote from the school, that the school's going to learn more from your child than the child will learn from them. That's great. Melissa, as an educator and have a significant amount of expertise, what does the disability standards for education mean to you, and how are they factored into educating kids who are blind and low vision?
Well, firstly, I always love hearing stories like Leslie, where the school has worked really hard with the parents and the communities to be able to support the students, because at the end of the day, it's all about the kids in the school. And so it's really warming to hear stories where schools are making inclusion a focus. One of the things that I think is really important is that education relies on vision. And signs welcome us to the school or the university, or the classrooms filled with posters. There's multimedia displays and whiteboards full of work. Then lunchtime play, you need to find where your friends are sitting, you need to see them. You need to see where the playground is, or if you're at university, you're usually on your phone. And this presents a barrier for students with a vision impairment. I think that one of the biggest problems in accessing equitable education is due to differences in experiences. And some people, like Leslie, have had positive experiences for their child. In part, that's because Lesleigh had the knowledge and took the time as well to find out what her son was entitled to, and had the ability to advocate for his needs and to express those. Many parents don't know what services such as early intervention are available to them. So usually a medical person may diagnose the eye condition, but not necessarily refer them to Vision Australia to get early intervention. When I worked in a rural town, a little child came to us in grade 1 and had a vision impairment and couldn't talk. And that little boy only received his first intervention upon starting school at the age of 5. Once they're at school, teachers have a differing understanding of the disability standards. So I was trained as a teacher prior to their release, but I don't remember getting any training about them as they were released. I heard about them later when I moved into inclusive education. However, most importantly, most or many teachers have a real innate desire to help students achieve and work really hard to ensure good educational opportunities in their classroom. But as we all know, vision impairment is a very low incidence disability. So many teachers may not have ever met a person with a vision impairment before, let alone know strategies to teach a child in their classroom who can't see the content. Specialist classes like PE or music or classes with any high visual content, they may not have been taught as a pre-service teacher how to cater for students. So enter our vision impairment specialists who, have a lot more knowledge and can assist the teachers. But also that relies on time in their workload, where the student lives and what equipment the student has to access, and also the access that they have to the school. So the research that I've done with Dr. Melissa Kane shows that experiences vary greatly throughout schools. And it can depend on the teachers, but the principal and their beliefs about inclusion and the systems. So I've seen a child who was learning Braille remotely due to lack of access in their school, but they were denied access to any video conferencing such as Skype or Zoom because the systems wouldn't allow it. Therefore, they were unable to have their Braille lessons. And by the way, we did think creatively to make this happen. And then I also see schools which, like Leslie's describing, go out of their way to make sure that they can provide equitable education. So the short answer is the disability standards are there to ensure equitable access, but in practice, everybody has a really different and unique experience. Oh, you're on mute now, Chris. the Zoom comment.
Yeah, the old common problem. Thanks, Melissa. It clearly it does put a lot of onus on the parents, and a recent survey that we did said that 60% of parents were unaware of the existence of these standards that help express what their rights and are. And out of that, only 60% of those actually knew anything about the standards before their child started school. Lesleigh, when you were looking for schools, how much effort was that as a parent to ensure that your child, did start on the right footing and have those resources that Melissa just talked about?
Look, a lot of effort. Like we were fortunate, I guess, to already have an older child within the school system, so we had a little bit of knowledge about that behind us. But whilst with our older child, the enrolment process took probably the enrolment application took about 15 minutes to complete. To get Jacob enrolled in school took me about, it was about an 18-month process all up. And that was I started very early contacting the school and the school system. I started myself assessing what challenges I thought Jacob had, and not necessarily academic challenges, things like social connections, whether he could ask for help, how he was going to get around the classroom and the playground. And looking at what extra supports I could have to build the capacity in him. So we were doing that in conjunction with it. But then when it actually came time to enrol, I just had, I had so many meetings with service providers, with medical people, with preschool staff. I gathered reports. I reviewed those reports to make sure that they contained detailed recommendations of the adjustments that he would need, and that was just to get him enrolled in the school. I mean, the transition and the amount of time that we spent after that was also quite lengthy.
So how could that be improved, Lesleigh, do you think?
Look, I think that it would certainly assist parents to have, more guidance as to, what the things are that you should do and be looking out for. Because I guess when I was enrolling Jacob, even though I had friends who were also enrolling children, they were enrolling them in different systems, and the systems seemed to be quite different in the way they operated. And so it was difficult to bounce off each other. And I often said to my husband, I felt like I was recreating the wheel, in order to enrol Jacob. And I'm sure that many people had done this before, but there didn't seem to be a lot of guidance as to, what are the steps you follow. It was more, I guess, as you said, the onus was on me as a parent to navigate my way around the system.
Yeah, I think that's certainly one of the challenges, and could often be improved, you would think. Melissa, how common, is that common, Leslie's story?
Yeah, the transition to school is a really, really big time, and I think we might have to commission Lesleigh to write a transition booklet, though. That would be... I think there'd be a lot of people on who'd have thumbs up going for that. But I think parents have really varying abilities and time to support their child's enrolment in the same way Lesleigh did. But it certainly raises the importance of a more streamlined transition. Currently, enrolment is really up to the principal, and I've had some principals say that, the school is the first community where students participate, so we need to have a representation of students of all backgrounds and abilities and teach students how to learn together. And others who sadly feel that students with a disability can add time and cost to the school. So in my experience, there are vast differences between schools and what levels of supports and reasonable adjustments they can provide. I think that the disability standards is a great guide to understanding what should happen in education, and what is more important is that it is the law and it sets the expectations. But most parents are unaware of the disability standards, so they don't have any knowledge of what they can advocate for and what they can ask for. And unless they have a background in education or law, it just is not something that they would know of. And it may not be in a language that we're familiar with. And by the way, Lesleigh, I found a great document on the Education Victoria site today that had it in English, easy English with picture communication symbols, the disability standards. So we'll pop that up on the Vision Australia. I guess you can put that up. So then once we get to schools, the standards actually lack clarity in what they have to provide. So, for example, there's a term in the standards that says that students with disability should be provided with reasonable adjustments to access the curriculum. So these reasonable adjustments are to allow students with disability to participate on the same basis as their peers. But what is considered reasonable can actually vary greatly between schools. For example, I know some schools who've provided access to braille machines. Even one school put on a support officer who had a vision impairment themselves to have role models with lived experience, which also promoted diversity in the school. Unfortunately, at another school, there was a problem with access to a braille machine. Better Start and now NDIS funding is not available for education purposes, and the student's family couldn't afford their own braille machine. So the school was asked to buy the braille machine, but the school said that it wasn't reasonable. Now, reasonable is another term in the standards which can be used to deny an adjustment if it causes harm to students, stop other students doing their best, or causes financial hardship for the school. So in this case, the school said that it was too expensive and was going to cause financial hardship for the school. However, financial hardship can be defined so broadly that it can be used to deny adjustments if the school wishes. Now, Chris, I'll just end my story about the Braille machine. The child ended up getting a loan Braille machine from Vision Australia, and another family at the school really kindly donated a Braille machine for the child. And I won't make too many more comments, but I certainly don't think that accessing reading and writing was unreasonable.
Mm. So, clearly what I'm hearing from both of you is like a consultative process, between, the family and the child and the school and service providers. Would it help with a more prescriptive, in the panel's view, a more prescriptive approach to that consultation process to prepare children into that, first transition to school and transition into high school?
Chris, I think it would. I was fortunate that it just naturally occurred in our case. Consultation has been a really great part of our experience, and it's been ongoing consultation which has also, allowed for changing needs and circumstances. But I think that sometimes that's where it falls down, that consultation is required, but standards don't give any minimum, standard for that consultation, and so it can vary widely as to what experiences people have.
Definitely. And we had a student when I was in a school who acquired a vision impairment from a brain tumour, and the healthcare nurse actually did a really wonderful transition to our school, talking to us about, what the disability standards were and how we could support the child and what we could do to make adjustments. And I think that was such a wonderful transition process that, Lesleigh, we really do need you to make some transition notes.
Speaking that is like, I've heard that autism, the autism associations have done some quite interesting transition packages. Do you know anything about that, Melissa?
Yes, they do. In Queensland, the autism has a wonderful transition to school, and it's just like a little package for transitioning to school and what sort of things you can ask the school and what sort of things you can expect. So I think that does really help a lot of children. And children with vision impairment have a lot of similar needs to people with autism, such as knowing what's going to happen and, knowing their location in their classroom. And so I think some of those things would be, really important.
Terrific. Ben, is there anything there that sort of surprises you about, those challenges around, getting enrolment right, which, obviously helps getting the supports right, and the variability, across school to school and possibly, whether it's independent, Catholic or government, and how do you think, the disability standards in education could better support that?
What was discussed doesn't surprise me, unfortunately. I think it's very much at the moment dependent on the individuals involved and the values they hold, and probably a little bit about financial means of the school and the area and the background of the people also involved. In the 2010 and 2015 review of the disability education standards, it was found that not many people knew about the standards, that there was a lack of clarity and understanding and awareness of the capability of the standards, that the complaints mechanism was not great, and that accountability and compliance mechanisms also needed to be worked on. And I think the critical term you used there, Chris, is it's inconsistent. And how do you deal with inconsistency is a really vexing question, because if you have too much prescription, then it doesn't allow much flexibility. And it may be that means that new technology is not used, or you don't come up with a co-designed solution. But the flip side is, if you don't have prescription, it can be very difficult to enforce. So there is that balance as to what's trying to be achieved. I think with assistive technology in particular, sometimes a bit more prescription can help, provided there is some certainty in what the individual in question needs. And the way to do that is to really, at a state level, probably to raise awareness as to what can be done to resolve issues. Often what greets a lack of knowledge is a resistance to change, where if you can provide the information to the principal and the teachers, I think, as to how it can be done, then they're probably more likely to engage in a constructive process of getting it done.
Mm. It certainly appears that consultation process, that conversation between the educator, between the supports that child might have had before school around building the knowledge and about these sorts of things with parents would be critical. Lesleigh, you were saying that that was a significant investment in your time, in getting everything set up for Jacob.
Absolutely. I mean, we wanted to provide Jacob as the best version that we could, but it did take a lot of time. It meant me taking time out of my career and to allow us to focus on that. And I appreciate that not everyone has the ability to do those things.
Yeah. So, I'm just reminding the audience that we're just about to be able to let you give us some stories, share your experiences. But on something you said earlier there, Ben, is that people find the standards a little bit confusing, and so obviously, Lesleigh, you've got a legal background, and so you're used to looking at legal type documents. A recent survey that we did, just under half of the people said that they found the standards very confusing. And so, those transition documents, and Melissa, you were talking about that easy English version, how important that clearly is to empower parents to understand what their rights are.
Yeah, I think it's really important that we do. And the other thing that's come up, like with everybody, is that when schools and teachers and families work together to advocate for the child, this is the best practice and we get the best outcomes for our students. So it's about seeing how everyone can work together to ensure the student can access the classroom, playground, camps, excursions, and all of the social aspects of school. Working together alleviates the need to constantly have to fight for what you need, and instead work through to ensure what is best practice and the student's really supported. One of the things that's really important for a student to be included in a school is that it's not just about academic inclusion, but it's about social participation and also gaining skills to be independent in their future employment and relationships. So I'm a parent of four myself, of four children. Oh, well, actually 2 adults and 2 children now, they're getting older. 2 with disabilities and 1 that has medical needs. And so as I told you, my 3rd child is legally blind, and I'd worked in the field of vision impairment before I had him. So I think I had a good understanding of what was available and what needed to happen. But even sometimes, because it was my own child, I didn't feel that I had the ability to advocate or the ability to know or to think clearly, because it was my own child. And I think sometimes that mama bear kind of takes over when it's your own child. But most parents don't know what they need or what is available. And that comes from experts in the field with their knowledge, and tools for the parents. But the parents have the specific knowledge about their child. So we need both together to be really important. The other thing that's really important about working together is it alleviates carer fatigue. So just having children anyway, 4 kids is quite fatiguing, but having children with disabilities is really, like, you know, I used to say that if I was writing a book, it would be called Chronicles of the Carer, and chapter 1 would be, I need respite to apply for respite. But I see so many parents who it's either not in their nature to advocate, so it causes a lot of anxiety, or people who've just had to advocate for so many things that they maybe, you know, stop fighting, or they have to pick their battles, or they just feel like they're fighting all the time. And that takes a toll on a person. Making complaints actually really hard. And what avenues do you have? Not everybody knows. How do you know this? Do you really understand if you do have the rights or not? You know, financial hardship doesn't have a dollar amount, so what is it? And then if you do fight about it, how does that impact your child in the school, your relationship with the teacher? And if in the very extreme circumstance that you had to go to court, would you have to pay the legal fees? If you think about all of that, you just wonder if you actually have the energy. But if everybody could have an open line of communication, it's just so much better. When I worked in schools, I actually offered meetings weekly with parents with disabilities, and this helped them to talk about anything that was coming up or concerning them, and ensured we worked together. I'll finish with, last week my son had a science test and they had to use microscopes to identify the bacteria. And when he told me, I was like, how are you going to see that? Can you ask your teacher what they'll do? And he did. And so they had a PF, which is a tactile picture, which you can feel what is happening in the picture for him. And they had a support person to describe the microscope. And they also had a little bit of time to practice and, you know, how to feel things and make out the patterns. So no advocating was needed, just a question. And this is in contrast to another situation where a child was going on an excursion to a beach to study erosion. And the parent asked, what adjustments will be made? And they said, well, your child gets around the school fine, so I'm sure they'll have no problem, which of course they then had to advocate. And these situations are not uncommon. So despite the standards and the knowledge, understanding differs about them between schools and teachers, and so does the interpretation. And I think this is where we have differences among the education that students are receiving in our schools.
Thank you. I think that's really important. It's, you know, that holistic part of the education. It's not just being able to access the English books. It's actually, you know, school camps and social events that, yeah, it's just as important that kids, you know, participate in that.
And friendship groups, isn't it, Leslie? Like friendship groups and social events, and when they get older, social media and those sorts of things, so that they can really be included with their peers.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things put in place for Jacob when he first started for the first couple of years was a sash system. So certain children would wear a sash in the playground so that he was able to identify them. Without that, he would have been wandering around a group of children who all looked the same in their school uniforms and hats, not knowing where his friends were. I mean, that's something very simple, something that, you know, has actually contributed enormously to his schooling, because when a child's happy, they can learn, and when they've got friends, they're happy, they can learn. So those sorts of small things are really, really important.
You know, one of the things I'm interested in, you know, with someone like you, Leslie, like you've got the ability to understand the standards in education. You've, you know, got the drive as a parent and to get the best for your child. One of the things in this recent survey is said that, you know, over 60% of parents actually have wanted to complain, but have thought it's too complicated, it's too hard, and they're not confident of the outcome. How confident would you be in complaining and seeing something through?
Look, I think I'd be confident in that I would be able to understand and know the process and navigate my way through the process. But for me, it would probably have to be something really significant before I would put a complaint in, because I know how time-consuming these things can be and how much of, a parent's time would be caught up in that. And I mean, I think that's even the case just to get to the point where you might have a conciliation meeting at the Human Rights Commission. I mean, that doesn't even, and I mean, you get to that point and that's a great first step. But if there's not an agreement reached, it means you then have to take it further. And that's where it could become costly and even more time consuming again. So knowing that, I mean, as I said, it would have to be something very significant for me to proceed with a complaint.
So a question to anybody in the panel, so I've got a child, things aren't going quite right. I don't think they're getting the right supports that I believe that they need, and what should I do?
Well, hopefully there is a person in the school that would be your child's dedicated case manager, and that would be the first place that you would go to raise a concern hopefully with your polite advocacy skills, first of all, just to send them a little email or pop in and ask. But sometimes it might concern that person, or you might need to go a little bit further to the principal. Lesleigh, when you were saying about, having to go to the Human Rights Commission, like even I was scared about that sort of thing. Like I'd be scared to go to the principal sometimes, to be able to communicate that. So hopefully things can be solved. A lot of systems, so education systems or Catholic systems, may have a parent liaison as well within their, district offices that you might be able to have a chat with as well. And then the other thing is, if you are really needing someone to help you advocate, I've used Vision Australia before and got people to come and advocate with me in the to a principal or to someone explaining things as well. So even, I feel like I am a confident person, but when it comes to your own child, you sometimes having an advocate help you makes a really big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Ben, what advice would you give parents? You obviously see that at the pointy end of these complaints sometimes. Is any advice that you'd give?
I can't give legal advice because every situation is very much different.
Yeah.
But in terms of just resolving disputes, I think what can happen is what is a small issue can become a big issue if it's not discussed. And so to the fullest extent possible, if you think an issue is developing, the best way to handle it is to have a series of small discussions about the issue and try and bring people along with you, because the dispute resolution process, conciliation, all takes time. And while that's occurring, your child still has to get an education. And you have to live as a family, and life goes on. And whilst that's not perfect to hear, sometimes you don't want to have something develop into a really big issue when it could have been resolved through a series of discussions quite early on. And so I think you've got to bring people along with you a little bit, and that takes time. And also I think don't assume that the person knows who you're dealing with, what you're talking about. Sometimes it helps to try and educate them in a really helpful and open manner about the issues, because often people's intent is actually quite laudable. They do want to do the right things, they just don't know how. And then if you sort of make them feel bad about it, they get a little bit defensive about it. And then it becomes a battle of personality rather than a battle of intent. And so I think if you can bring people along and have those little discussions and try and prevent an issue developing to the fullest extent possible, then I think you'll get much better outcomes than by sort of being accusatory or waiting for a big issue to develop.
Yeah, I think that I think that what you said up the front is that discussion, that consultation, that ability to talk it through is so critical at the start, so that everyone can hear each other's perspectives and help move it through.
Chris, there was a really good question in the chat from Jo, and she lives in regional Victoria, and she hasn't, they're transitioning to high school next year, and her child hasn't been able to get onto campus, obviously, to explore the campus for the transition. And Jo was just asking if she should push that. My personal answer to that, if you'd like my answer, Jo, is that I think that it is a little bit of they use this term all the time, it's a bit unprecedented, but it's a little bit difficult at the moment to necessarily get on campuses. So, but certainly during term 4, that you would really want to be able to do that. And I would just be in conversation with the school about, even if it can't be now, can it be later, or can it be in the school holidays before term 1 starts? Usually with an orientation and mobility officer, to be able to take them around the school and just be able to give them some familiarity with where the school is and where they are within the school.
Terrific. Ben, it'd be useful to hear some experiences from parents?
Of course, yeah. Well, and in particular, if there are any students in the audience, I'd love to hear from them. But there's nothing better than hearing first-hand experience of what's happened, and I'd love to hear from anyone who wants to say anything.
Thank you. So you can either put a question up in chat, but we'd love to hear from you in person. So to do that, you can put your press the hand up button in the webinar, and then Jess will unmute you, and we'd love to hear some of your stories. Jess, has anybody got their hand up at the moment?
Not yet, Chris, no.
Can you explain the shortcut keys if there is anybody that's a student that's using a JAWS to be able to do that for us?
Yeah, sure. We have actually got a couple hands up now, so I might go to you first, Emily, and while you're talking, I will find the shortcut keys.
Welcome, Emily.
Hello. How are you all?
We're very good.
All right. I apologise if you can hear the little 8-year-old in the background playing Minecraft.
Yes, that sounds like an 8-year-old.
Yes. My son is low vision and we're from Victoria. So currently we face short-term fixes where, you advocate for your child along the same issue that invariably looks different sometimes, but it's basically the same issue over and over and over again. And like you said, it becomes very tiresome, and it's your mama bear comes out and you feel like, why are we doing this? But we often face changes that need to be made within the school playground or just in the environment. But what it boils down to consistently is funding. The school won't change, won't adapt, yellow lining or strips on stairs, things like that just make it easier for my son to move around. And we've been going, he's repeating grade 2, so this has been an ongoing thing since preps. I also find that the level of technology training, like personal training for teachers, is just not there. So when it comes to adapting the schoolwork, as in text, fonts and sizes, that's also a continuous battle. You always have to remind them, well, hang on, my child can't see that. Can you change it? And if you're not on it all the time, it goes unnoticed, because he's 1 out of 26 in that class. So it's really It's really sad. And my son too also has other comorbidities. He's ASD, he's ADHD. He's got a range of extra little quirks that make him just wonderful and fun.
Yep.
But it often boils down to, is that the problem, or is it the vision the problem? And it seems to be very easily cross-connected.
Okay.
He ends up somewhere in the middle of nowhere.
Thanks, Emily. So the standards, Melissa. So from a special ed support teacher, what are the things that should be in place for kids that might require technologies, etc. In the case of Emily's?
Yeah, well, technologies can really vary across schools and what you have access to. And I did note in the chat before when I was discussing about how you can get a braille machine for home. And yes, that's really true. But sometimes it depends on which braille machine you have. Like if you have a little electronic braille machine like a Focus 40, it's quite easy to bring to and from school. But a Perkins Brailler or a Mountbatten is a little bit more difficult to transport to and from school. But certainly the things that I start with are really low cost and low technology changes. So that could be some simple solution like, if the school doesn't want to do the yellow tree routes because they cost too much when they have to go through queue build, is there the possibility of using, of walking your child around there so that they know where they are, or will they let you spray paint them yourself? And some schools might let you do that. Also, when adapting in the classroom, some of this is really hard because, as you're saying, your child has the extra little quirks that makes them individual, which is really special, but it might be harder for him to stand up and say, I can't see that or I can't access it. But could it be using some different things like, possibly if you had an iPad, they could actually enlarge it themselves, or trying to work on some ways of being able to access that independently so you're not relying on people to be able to do that. And I don't know that always will happen or will work, but I usually try and start with, what are some ways that are low cost, really easy, that we really could be implementing quickly to make a difference.
Thank you.
Emily, can I just ask whether the school would accept someone coming to do an environmental assessment of the school for your son, like someone like Vision Australia coming in?
It's funny you mentioned that. We've actually had two done by Vision Australia. Braxton's, he works with them really well, and they've been great, but the school very, very slow to implement any of the changes. As far as whiteboards and things like that, that is very fatiguing for Braxton. Spatial crowding on pages, things like that. It just makes life very difficult when you're advocating for just one child. If it was a implementation, say if there was a low vision throughout the school in every class, I'm sure it would be very different. Whilst his school is really quite supportive, they do lack that side that is his vision side, and that's the side that helps him learn, really, at the end of the day.
Emily, Braxton have an iPad?
He does have an iPad, yep.
Yeah, because, that might be something that could enlarge the font and, reduce the space sizing and crowding as well.
Yeah, look, we do all of those things, but when it comes down to readers, when it comes down to the handwriting books or their maths books that they're all sort of using within the curriculum now, they're all very small, and it's just doesn't work for us. And then it's like, well, we need to photocopy them, and unless you're continually on top of it, it doesn't happen. And I noticed with COVID, obviously we all got sort of take-home packs and things like that. For us in Victoria, we've been locked out for quite some time. when I come to looking at it, I was like, well, how do you function with all of this, mate? Because you just can't see that, darling. And he says, I can see it, but because he can actually just see the page, he thinks he can see exactly what's on it, and doesn't have the language to say, no, I don't know what they're actually saying.
Okay, thanks, Emily. Ben, reasonable adjustments is certainly part of the standards.
Yes, they are, Chris. They're a very, very fact-intensive inquiry, which makes it tough for people to look at and say, that's reasonable. And in a sense, that's what's part of the challenge, is because it also requires the issues such as the cost and benefit of making the adjustment, the effect of anyone else, including the education provider of providing the adjustment, the nature of the student's disability to be taken into consideration. And when you do all these things, it's not easy to look at something off the bat and just say, or, you know, up front, oh, that's reasonable, that's not. There's often a lot of work that has to go into working it out and co-design. And this is part of the reason why there is a real, I think, benefit in trying to work with the organisation you're dealing with to get the outcome you want up front, working together, because even if the matter doesn't resolve, it's just so, it can be very opaque as to what is or is not reasonable in the circumstances, which no one likes to hear, because everyone wants what's best for obviously themselves and their family at all times. But the very core concern is, I think, one of being practical, and that practicality is best served by being upfront and approachable and trying to work with the organisation to resolve the issues up front. And obviously to fall back on your rights, and that you should be quite open about that. But in the end, even if you were to bring a claim for disability discrimination, you get sent to conciliation. So you may as well conciliate up front, because in a sense, that's where you're going to get to eventually and hopefully resolve it. But it is understandable when people express frustration as to applying reasonable adjustment. It's not an easy thing to resolve without all material facts in front of you at the time.
It is. I agree. I think it is a difficult thing. I don't know what level of vision Emily's little fellow has, but I can tell you on day one of Jacob's schooling, the environment was modified. There were yellow lines, there was yellow everywhere. The lighting had been adjusted, trip hazards removed. And I mean, he's assessed as legally blind. And I mean, that's something that we had a environmental assessment done, and it was just something that was just done as a matter of course. So yeah, I appreciate it. It does probably depend on the individual circumstances, but I think environmental adjustments and spraying yellow paint is you know, and tactile markings are probably something which should generally be considered reasonable.
Melissa, do you think there's enough training for educators around these necessary adjustments?
Well, unfortunately, you know, for pre-service teachers, you have to learn a lot of content in terms of, you know, English and maths and science and all of those sorts of things. And there is time spent on inclusion and how we need to include students and differentiate for lots of different kids. But specific things about a child with a vision impairment may not be specifically taught. And that is because every child with a vision impairment is just so different. And like we already heard from Emily, her child has other little things that makes him him. And each child with a vision impairment has a different type of vision impairment. Some children can see from the centre of their eyes, other children have peripheral vision, other people have like a little bit of vision, and other people have no vision. So because everybody is so different and vision impairment is such a low incidence, even if you knew some strategies to do, you may not ever implement them or use them until you have a child in your classroom. So I think that's probably where we need specialist support to be able to make sure that there is the knowledge of what is required.
One of the things that our school did before Jacob started was to actually run a training program for all teachers at the school to train them on vision impairment and how to support a student with a vision impairment. And then those who were working more closely with Jacob actually visited another school in the area that was supporting a child and had a look at the adjustments that were being made for that child whilst, you know, the child was obviously different. There were some commonalities, you know, that could be used. So yeah, and that training was internal training that was done, but yeah, the principal used it, I guess, as the continuous learning for that year. I think teachers do have to have some sort of continuous learning component, and he said, well, let's train everyone on vision.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, and I've had a lot of schools who have put teachers with blindfolds and got them to do different things, like got them to even open their lunch with Glad wrap. And, you know, find where their friends are in the playground, read a book, play handball, all of those sorts of things, go down the stairs that would happen normally in a day. And I think that really does raise awareness in a classroom and for the teachers in the school as well, that these students are working harder every day to be able to do what everybody else can do.
Absolutely. Now, Jess, I think someone else has got their hand up.
Yes, Chris, that's right. So we've got Casey. So Casey, I'm just going to unmute you now.
Hello, how are you?
Very well, welcome.
Sorry, I come in late to the thing. I was putting kids to bed and things, but I was put on to tonight from our OT at Vision Australia. I live in Victoria. I have a son with congenital nystagmus, and he also has a speech impairment and an ID as well. So he has a cluster of disabilities so at home we have just a kid that is amazing and no behaviours, just a beautiful boy. But at school, and it's becoming more and more apparent, is that Ashy is just so, you know, there's so many school-based stresses that come back to his the school not supporting him with his vision and with his disabilities, but mainly his vision. They don't seem to set up anything or a curriculum that supports him. And we've had every bit of technology. Like, it's not even the technology now, it's about them setting up a curriculum that fits him and that works for him. So at the moment, so in the first lockdown, I didn't work. I could support Ashton, and I did all of so they had an amazing set up for every other child, but nothing for Ashton. It was, Mum, you work out what you're going to do with him. So I did. This lockdown, I'm working, and they have still not set up a remote learning, you know, for Ashton. So my question is, like, you know, what is the expectation of what they should be providing for him for remote learning based on his, you know, the supports he needs, where ultimately my son's just getting no education because it's too hard for them.
Thanks, Casey. Interestingly enough, in this survey that we've just recently done, is that 70% of respondents said that their child has been significantly impacted, their education through COVID, which is probably not surprising, but, you know, it'd be interesting to compare that with other students. And clearly, you know, Melissa, the school, you know, does have a responsibility to look at how they engage all students when looking at these remote settings.
Yeah, absolutely. And remembering that many teachers have been put in a position that they've never been put in before, trying to get things out to students. And so I think they're, we're trying to be mindful of that, but at the same time, we need our children learning. And have you been in touch with, does your child have an advisory teacher that, like from vision services, those sorts of things, that has been able to support, because they can work together with the school, hopefully, to be able to provide access to information and learning for you as well.
Yeah, so our OT has provided all of that, and they just haven't followed through with any of it. I also put forward that, because at one stage they were expecting Ashton to send an email on his own when he's at home with his dad, and he can't, he's still learning the text to talk stuff at the moment. So he's just in the early stages of learning that. He just can't do that on his own. And so I said, but Zoom he can use really well, like really well. So, for them just to do, a Zoom meeting once a day for half an hour with one of the aides or one of the teachers, and do a worksheet with him, or just to keep him engaged, really. To do, something, in my opinion, is better than nothing at all. But they just haven't done that at all. So I've just given them, I've sort of gone over what didn't work last lockdown, what, we could do to support him this time, and there's just no movement whatsoever.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, it's a hard situation, particularly, and I would just get onto the school and say, look, we really need some support here. Do you have any ideas of what you can provide? And, because this is what we're doing at this end, but we really do need some support here, and hopefully just by contacting them. And I know you've already done that, but, if you're contacting them, sometimes the squeaky wheel, if you keep contacting them every day, hopefully
I know.
they'll be
Well, that's, yeah. And I've got a great support team, like our OT and our speech, and everyone's we've got a great support network in terms of that. So I think, if we do keep pushing and pushing, but I just feel like they're just not providing him with an education at all at the moment. And it's like, I feel like they're just failing him on so many levels. But in their opinion, well, what are we meant to do?
Casey, the other thing you could do is reach out to the sensory group. I'm not sure what it's called in Victoria, who sits within the education department or Catholic school.
Statewide Vision Resource Centre directly.
Yeah, so that's who we gave the school the details of them to contact to, and that's who so I'm going to push that again tomorrow.
I just wonder whether they might be supporting other students in a similar circumstance, and whether they might be able to give the school some advice about some simple methods that they might be able to utilise for your son too.
So can I contact them as a parent as well, and not just the school? Am I able to?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
And certainly, I don't know whether is your OT and speech from Vision Australia or from
our
another,
OT is, yep.
OT, yeah. Well, certainly, you could also, we've got an advocacy team here that would, be very happy to help support something like that.
That would be fantastic. She, our OT is just amazing, and she's really been seeing this quite for some time as well. So we're all trying to come together to get Ashley's support, but I just need them to get on on the team, Ashton, as well.
It is a challenging time, and it's coming up to school holidays, so they can sort of try and get their act together for term 4. Hopefully, it's been a very difficult year.
It has.
If I can add one more piece of advice, there is that there are a lot of students, who might find this time really challenging, and one thing that's really important to encourage is the child and their self-worth, and how important they are and how special they are, and their well-being, and get them doing things that they like doing, as well as because if they're going to find the schoolwork hard, get them doing something during the day that they are really good at, like Minecraft or whatever it is. But you know, so that they feel that they're good at something, and so that they feel that they're worthwhile and really special, and because a child's, you know, mental health is really important as well. So
Yeah.
Certainly it's challenging, yes. Jess, how are we going for hands at the moment?
No more hands at the moment. So if anyone is keen to ask a question.
We've just got a few more minutes. Is there any comments that would be worth reading out? Obviously being blind myself, I'm not able to read the comments as they come up, but
we've got one comment from Emily. Melissa, I think that's the one did you just see that one?
Yes. Yep. Do you want to read it out?
Yeah, I can read out the comments. So Emily has said, I feel the burden on parents is too high to continually educate and advocate to schools about the requirements and accommodations for our children. It's a fine line between making good relationships with the school and talking disability rights when things aren't working. Where is the support from intermediaries to act as the advocacy voice in meetings, in transitions, etc., to better support parents?
Yeah, that's that carer fatigue.
yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I've used Vision Australia as an advocate in meetings with me for my children when I've gone in, but I guess there isn't an allocated advocate or person that when you have a child with a disability that is there, and that's why it's really hard for us as parents, because it's us. And if we don't fight for our kiddies, then no one necessarily will fight for them. So it's really important that we do, but it is hard work and ongoing, as you say, Emily.
And do you think that that's something in our submission that we should be talking about when we're thinking about the reviews of standards and how they could apply?
Yeah, and what support's available for parents, you know, when this is ongoing, definitely. There was a question in the chat that I think I just saw, but maybe I missed. It was, what are our rights during COVID? In terms of, it must be in terms of education. Is that one over to you, Ben?
Oh, thank you for that.
Just from the standards, you know, what you know, in general terms, obviously, not specific.
Yeah, in general terms, I think the legal system still operates during COVID. There would be obviously public health advice, or the equivalent of public health advice would be potentially a complete or a conditional defence on certain issues. So, for example, the need to physically distance is not a breach of the Disability Discrimination Act because of the health requirement of it, particularly when COVID was particularly virulent. Where it works as a conditional, it's more of a balancing factor that would have to be taken into consideration. I think people should probably be realistic that I suspect a court would have a little bit of reticence to find or make adverse findings that people saw this as foreseeable. No one really saw the extent of the lockdown as foreseeable following COVID, so there would be some time and grace period allocated to people to try and make things as accessible as possible. But I really think to the fullest extent possible in this time, it's best to try and have the conversation about what is material and what's needed to be changed, etc. And if that can occur, then I think you get better outcomes, because we don't know how long it's going to be. I think everyone's tempers can be reasonably frayed. People can be stressed. You don't know the stress that everyone's going through. And one of the things that is a good way to sometimes get people to change their conduct is to show them good examples or things that were done really well, or, you know, and say, you know, have you thought of this, and praise people when they've done stuff well, and send praise to the person who's in charge of a particular area, or to the minister or stuff like that, because then, you know, once people get praised for it, they think, oh, this should become the norm. And so that's another way of sort of really being quite open as to what was good behaviour, can go a long way. I mean, there's always got the stick there of the standards and the Disability Discrimination Act, but we're also all humans, and being humans, we're dealing with humans in education, and kids' educations have to continue. And it can be nice to sort of just try the amicable approach to start with, if possible.
We're almost out of time, but I was thinking maybe Leslie, like, you know, we're talking about good examples and highlighting good examples. You know, the experience going to lockdown for you, and of course, being in Sydney, you're not in that situation quite at the moment, but how was that dealt with for you? We've probably got, 30 seconds or so to be able to.
Yeah, look, I still had the, definite support of the school and people checking in on me. It is difficult, though. I think with vision, it relies very much on, sometimes people physically being present. I did find that I was doing, a lot for Jacob. I took over, remote braille lessons with him and the like. And I think that, I did, like Ben said, I did say to the school, this is what's working well, or this isn't quite working, or could we do this slightly differently? And they were happy just to take my lead on things, and if work had to be reduced or changed or whatever, that's what we did. But look, it did fall to parents a lot, and unfortunately I think that's the nature of the situation we are in at the moment. But definitely using the praise, I've used that a lot in my time with Jacob's school, and buying really good Christmas presents also helps.
Melissa, have you got any feedback there?
No, only the same as Leslie, as I make really good rocky roads, so kids want kids in my class so they can get my rocky road. For the work that they need to do, I do think it is a difficult situation at the moment. There was a wonderful suggestion in the chat that possibly parents can help each other in this situation when they have to advocate for their child, because it is, as I keep saying, really hard to advocate for your own child. So having somebody else as a buddy parent might be really helpful in that situation as well. But Leslie, you need to go and give your school a whole heap of praise today, because I think there's a whole heap of people on here who are well done to your school. And so they deserve some praise. But for all of you who are out there and who are advocating every day and feeling that fatigue, at the end of the day, you'll know that you've done everything that you can for your kiddies, and I think that's really important.
It's a great closing remark. Ben or Leslie, have you got anything you want to say to close?
Look, probably just to mirror what Melissa said, build those relationships, be as positive as you can in working together with the school. I think that is the thing that really helps. And if you need to advocate for your child, do that in a way that's going to try and get the best outcome for them.
And Ben?
I think when you dealing with what is, in a sense, our most precious resource, being children, you always have to remember that at the same time, that child has to have their education, and so the world does not stop while sort of issues are trying to be resolved. So the more that you can provide information to the school, advocate up front, show them what are good examples, point out easy things to do, like applying tactile ground indicators or painting aspects of the school a different colour, etc. And those easy sort of issues for them to resolve up front in advance before when stuff gets critical, then I think you get a much better outcome than waiting for something to go really poorly. And if you can point to an example of where it's been done or where it's been done effectively, then people can sometimes see how it can be done. And in that respect, if you can liaise with peers who maybe have an older child or a child who's been through it, sometimes they can provide that golden word of wisdom which might be able to get them to get a better outcome for their child, and that's where advocacy can be very important as well, because sometimes advocates have seen the issue before and they can say, well, you know, have you considered this? And that is a nice circuit breaker to get the issue resolved. It's important that parents and ideally children, but it's not always realistic given children's age for them to contribute, are active in government sort of reviews, etc. The education standards are being reviewed this year. It is important to the extent that people have concerns that they raise them. And the National Disability Strategy is also being reviewed this year. And again, it's important that people say what is a concern to them so they feel it's part of the policy framework which they work in. So please try and be as active as possible. I know it's a tiring time at the moment, but to the fullest extent possible, if you have good stories or constructive feedback on government policies, then be active and get involved, because it can create long-term sustainable change.
Thank you very much. Been a terrific wrap up. And I'd really like to thank all the panel members. It's been a fabulous discussion. I want to just finish by highlighting a few things. So, you know, in Vision Australia, we have developed these Stand Up for Your Rights guides, and there is one on education. So if you go to the Vision Australia website and look up Stand Up for Your Rights or Advocacy, you'll see a Stand Up for Your Right, which helps provide you with some advocacy steps that you can do, as well as you know, give you a little bit of guidance around what the rights that you have. We Vision Australia are doing a submission to both those things that Ben raised around the disability standards and the National Disability Strategy. And so if you want to contribute to that, please, you would have been sent a survey. Please fill out that. And yeah, there's lots of spaces there where you can share your stories that we will try and include in our submissions. We'll certainly provide some of the themes of what we've been hearing today into the submission. And you know, if you do need some support, we do have an advocacy service. You can contact the Standard Vision Australia number to get to us and ask for advocacy, or you can email advocacy@visionaustralia.org. So we've hit time, and I really thank everybody for taking the time out to listen to it, and particularly thanks to the panel for such a wonderful discussion. So thank you to all.
Vision Australia.
Blindness,
low vision,
Opportunity.
Vision Australia logo. 3 navy blue ovals linked together diagonally within a bright yellow rectangle.